Looks like Delegate Sickles has joined us now. So why don't we begin the meeting? Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Welcome to the meeting of the JLARC Study Topic Selection Subcommittee. I'm Hal Greer, the staff director at JLARC. We really appreciate you coming together this morning to discuss topic selection given your busy schedules. I'd like to first introduce our three associate directors who are here with me this morning. Senior Associate Director Justin Brown, Associate Director Kimberly Sarte, and Associate Director Tracy Smith. Justin and Tracy will be sharing in the staff presentation to you this morning, and all three associate directors will be available to answer questions that you may have. Also joining us this morning is Nathan Skreslet, our technology and graphics expert, who will brief you on meeting logistics and then call the roll. Nathan?
All right, good morning, members of the commission. Thanks for being with us today. My name is Nathan Skreslet. I'm on the JLARC staff, and I'll be facilitating the technical side of today's meeting. Before Hal starts with the agenda, I'll just take a few moments to go over the meeting logistics because it's been a little while since we did one of these. Firstly, we've set several different tiers of participants for this meeting. As you can see here. U.S. Commission members, in addition to some of our staff who are presenting today, are categorized as panelists. All panelists have full participation capabilities. You can share video, audio, ask questions, make comments. Second tier of participants is called attendees. I don't think we'll have any of those today. And then for the third tier, we have a live YouTube stream for members of the media and the public. They can watch and listen to today's meeting, but won't be able to comment. Afterwards, recordings of this meeting will be available both on the JLARC YouTube channel and on our website. As you may have noticed, as you join the meeting, your audio is automatically placed on mute. This allows you to listen, but prevents your microphone from picking up distracting background noise that may disrupt the speakers. But for the benefit of participants, please ensure that your mics are muted when not in use. If you forget, that's not a problem. I can do that remotely. However, I cannot activate audio or video remotely. You have to do that on your own system locally. If you would like to ask a question anytime during today's presentations, our speakers will pause regularly to invite questions. Simply ask the chair to be recognized in order to ask a question or make a comment. If you're using audio only and not video to join the briefing, I don't think anyone is, but if you are, or if your audio drops out and you have to call in, just identify yourself before speaking so we know who you are. Finally, during the meeting, if you're having any technical issues, please contact us via the methods here, and we have staff waiting to help you out with any technical fixes. I think that's all of that. I'll just quickly go through the roll call. Do we have Delegate Sickles? Might need to turn on your audio.
I'm present.
All right, great. Delegate Austin?
Present.
Awesome. Speaker Fillicorn?
Present.
Delegate Plum?
Present.
Senator Howell?
I'm here.
Senator Locke?
Present.
Senator McPike?
Here.
And Senator Norman? He might be the only one who's not here yet. That's okay. All right, that concludes this part. Next, our director, Hal Greer, is going to go over the meeting agenda for today.
Thank you, Nathan. And before I begin that, Delegate Sickles would certainly welcome any comment that you'd like to make to open the meeting. If not, we can proceed. Okay, let's proceed with today's meeting. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the assignment of the next round of studies to JLARC staff. I would briefly note that JLARC staff regularly conduct evaluations as part of our ongoing oversight responsibilities and produce other reports annually, but those evaluations and reports will not be part of today's discussion. We have a relatively short PowerPoint that we would like to present, which sets forth potential study topics for your consideration. You should have received the PowerPoint in the mail. And we'd certainly also welcome ideas for studies that are not included in today's presentation. After the presentation, we'll turn it over to you for discussion, and staff will be here to answer questions that you may have. We also welcome questions and discussion as we present our slides. Turning to the slides, the objective for today's meeting will be to consider and discuss potential study topics and then develop a list of topics to be recommended to the full commission for consideration and hopefully approval. For topics that you'd like to recommend to the full commission for its consideration, we propose that after this meeting, staff draft study resolutions that would outline what the proposed studies would entail, which would then be provided to all the commission members for consideration. Of course, this step will not be needed for study topics for which resolutions have already been drafted. It may be that we need more than one meeting to come to consensus on a list of recommended topics, but perhaps we can complete the work today. It's like we don't have the slides up yet. Here we go. Turning to slide 3. Kimberly, can we get to 3? I want to give you a sense of how much work we can do over the next year. We have the capacity to conduct 5 or 6 major studies in a given year. The exact number depends on the size and the complexity of the studies that are directed to us. Studies that you assign this fall will be completed during calendar year 2021. And I'd like to point out that if you assign a full slate of studies now and a new, more pressing study topic arises during the session, we certainly have the flexibility to put aside a study that we're working on and take up one that is deemed to be a higher priority. That, in fact, has occurred each of the last 2 years. One other point I'd make is that you also have the flexibility to assign more studies than we have the capacity to do right now, and we'll just simply take up the studies as we have staff capacity. Now I'd like to turn it over to Justin Brown, who will discuss studies that have been proposed. Justin?
Thanks, Al. Just wanted to briefly on slide 4 show you the various ways that you can assign us our work. We'll go through these kind of in order in a minute, starting with the study resolutions that were referred from the last session. But we also did want to point out that the code includes a provision that's been in the law since the late 1970s, actually, that allows us to do these kind of rotating reviews of major functions of government. It's called the Legislative Program Review and Evaluation Act. We kind of did this with topics such as transportation and corrections in the 1980s. We did a little bit with higher education in the 2013-2014 timeframe. But since we have some new members, we did want to remind you that that provision is in the law if you'd ever like to use it. I'll also take a second in another slide to remind you what the prior JLARC study subcommittee had kind of contemplated as some study priorities. And then we'll wrap up with Tracy sharing with you some suggestions that our staff have for potential studies that might make sense as well. So if we go to slide 5, start with the joint resolutions from the session. And there were a total of 10 topics that were referred to the JLARC study subcommittee, primarily from House rules, but there was also one from Senate rules. And the first table there, we've kind of grouped them around the broad category of public safety and courts. There were actually 2 resolutions for us to study reinstating discretionary parole. I believe that's something that the Crime Commission is also doing some work on. The resolution entails reviewing the costs and benefits of reinstating parole and the positive effects that granting parole can have on individuals. The second item there was a resolution by Delegate Price. It would look at the impact of gun violence on people and communities, and I think also the goal is to identify some options to potentially reduce the gun violence itself, as well as the harm that gun violence can do on individuals in the broader community. The third resolution in that group was from Delegate Aird, and that would look at correctional education and how well Virginia prepares inmates to come back into society, and kind of more broadly, taking a look at that adequate housing and whether they have the skills necessary to gain employment and be successful. We have an idea a little bit later that Tracy will talk about to kind of augment some things into that topic. to broaden that out perhaps a little bit. The last group in this area related to I suppose, the courts would be something that Delegate Rome introduced to look at guardianship and conservatorship, particularly court-mandated guardians. And some of you may have read some of the fairly concerning pieces in the media on this topic over the last year or so. If we move to the next table there, there were some other studies that didn't fit neatly into a bucket. A few of them focused on funding specifically, and some of them were on some other topics. So I'll just touch on those briefly. You can see a resolution from Senator Reeves on funding related to education. You can see that the third row down there, there was a similar one from Delegate Scott on teacher salaries and benefits. Delegate Carter introduced a resolution to study the cost of universal health care. Down near the bottom, Delegate Ware introduced a resolution to review funding for constitutional officers. And there were two resolutions introduced by JLARC members. Delegate Stickles introduced one for voting by mail, which at the time was pretty prescient, but might have been overtaken by events. And that bottom one there was introduced by Delegate Austin. And it points out that there's been some kind of additions to the transportation funding system, but also there's some problems maybe with the condition of the infrastructure, and certainly relying so much on the gas tax as people are driving less may have some implications. So we did a lot of work in transportation in the 1980s and 1990s, but it's been quite a long time since we did any major work in the transportation area. So I will just pause there for a moment if any members have questions or preferences about that before we move, just to remind you what the prior JLARC study subcommittee had put on the table.
I have one question real quick as to whether, I know on the sort of the next slide in the prior work program is child protective systems, whether or not Delegate Rome's bill would also sort of fit within that framework, dealing with guardians and conservators.
That's a good question. Tracy, you can maybe weigh in on this too. I think the Child Protective Services review as designed was specifically focused kind of on that program that's run by the Department of Social Services. However, you make a good point that it is absolutely possible that there are some people who are quite vulnerable, particularly children, and have either a conservator or a guardian. And so there may be a need to kind of understand what the crosswalk is between the Child Protective Services system and particularly children that are under court-mandated guardianship or conservatorship. So that I think there might be a touch point there. Tracy, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but certainly not mutually exclusive.
I think that's a very good observation, Senator. And I think my understanding, and my team will correct me if I'm wrong, was that Delegate Rome's study was focusing, at least based on what I've read in the media accounts of some of these issues, focusing more on issues with adults. That doesn't mean that we certainly couldn't broaden that look and look at, all Virginians and the programs that are in place to provide those services regardless of age. I do think with the CPS study, the foster care, the team that we had looking at foster care a couple of years ago had identified a sufficient number of concerns, or I guess red flags, that we felt like that warranted a full focus. And my sense is that that is also true of the guardianship study that Delegate Rome is interested in. But I do think, as Justin said, there is definitely a relationship there. I think they are they involve two separate programs and systems. But I think broadly, the policy surrounding that is very related. And so we'd be happy to think further about how those ideas could be incorporated into a larger study.
I appreciate that. I think there are similarities, although different systems that may be informative for the subcommittee's consideration. Thank you. Hal, this is Mark Sickles. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've tried to talk a couple times and I'm either muted or wrong. So are you chairing this meeting? Are we working through you? Is that how this works? Or I just
just kind of curious who I should, when you interrupt, who you,
No,
Are
my
you-
understanding is
okay.
that you're chairing this meeting, but.
well, I'm just on the House side, but I wanted to interject that House members have looked at this stuff, and we have recommendation on our. This is just for discussion, but we have 5 priorities out of this list that includes what we're talking about. And at the appropriate time, I'd like to go through what we're thinking to maybe move this along just a little bit.
Okay.
And get feedback. Would now be a good time to do that, or a little bit later?
Sure, if you would like to now, absolutely.
Okay, all right. So I wrote a few notes down here, so I'm going to be reading a little bit of this. The Virginia Employment Commission is having a year like none other in its history, and with the new federal programs, with the sheer explosion of the number of applications for UI, our constituents have been understandably frustrated by delays and confusion. We recommend a comprehensive study of the VEC seeking recommendations on how the agency can better prepare for similar emergencies in the future, as well as how to better serve the public in so-called normal times. Number 2, that's our top priority, by the way, based on our experience in the last 6 months here. Number 2, the criminal justice reform area. I know that JLARC staff is interested in getting into this area as we've discussed this, and we are taking some important first steps this summer, fall in this area of prime state responsibility, criminal law. And we need and therefore recommend a comprehensive CJR study to evaluate evidence-based policies implemented in other states to reduce crime, improve human outcomes, and potentially save taxpayer dollars. This is one of the subjects we had to put down here is parole, but I know, and you've mentioned this already, the Crime Commission is doing a study on parole. So if we decided to move forward in the CJR area, we would have to make sure to double up our efforts so we don't, do the same thing they're doing and stay out of each other's way to the maximum extent practicable. But sentencing and release related issues. Yes, sir.
I was just asking, would that extend to incarceration too, the whole DOC side? Or are you thinking short of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would. I don't know exactly the parameters of the Crime Commission study. So, we don't want to necessarily do anything that they're working on just for practical reasons. And so I don't know exactly how to answer your question, although that we just need to work to make sure we don't do something they're doing, I think. The gun violence in communities issue, the prison/jail inmate improvement opportunities, in other words, efforts to reduce recidivism. I know that our DOC has a very low rate we talk about. Our jails do not have the same low recidivism rate. Juvenile justice matters and policing practices. We need to ensure that the criminal justice policies are not counterproductive and are evidence-based to the maximum extent practicable. So that this CJR area would need to be refined, but we would really like to do something in this area. Third, as a common, Madam Speaker.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Hal, to your question also, or the focus on this one too, would likely include, we'd like it to include the agencies, review of the agencies, and more specifically DCJS as well, and how they're doing managing the grants and spending the money, all of that, be overall inclusive in that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Yep. As the Commonwealth turns to online K-12 education almost exclusively during the pandemic, we must ensure that our children are receiving the best possible virtual learning experience. We recommend a study to make sure Virginia is taking all the right steps to make this happen. Further, as in-classroom instruction returns, what elements of online learning should continue to be employed as part of a well-rounded 21st century education. Number 4, we recommend a study of the operations and performance of guardians and conservators in the Commonwealth. This was discussed a minute ago. A 3-part Richmond Times-Dispatch investigative series laid bare the problems in our system. How many wards should a single guardian be expected to manage? what systems can be set up to discover abuse, what current operations and performance standards are being met, where are the holes in our regulatory oversight, what evidence-based practices can be adopted in the Commonwealth that lead to positive outcomes. These are some of the questions that must be addressed. Number 5 is the general big topic area of housing for moderate income workforce, for low income workers, for those suffering from substance abuse or from serious mental illness. Housing is increasingly in short supply in the Commonwealth. So we recommend a comprehensive housing study to examine best practices to fill these critical needs. What can the state do? And maybe more importantly, how can the state government best assist local government in their housing initiatives? So those are our 5. We like some other topics too, but we wanted to pick out 5 to see what kind of feedback we would get from the rest of the study committee and our Senate counterparts. But these are 5 things that are most important to us right now. So I'd invite any feedback or questions about that, or if anybody disagree, or if and this is only 5. I know that the JLARC has capacity to do more than 5 large studies, but not much more than 5. Look forward to hearing anybody's opinion on these 5 things.
Mr. Chairman. Chairman Sickles.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Delegate Plum, number 1.
Thank you, sir. I would like to also add to the fact that while this is boiled down to seemingly 5 topics, if you take a look at the wonderful background paper that the staff presented, what happens is a lot of those items collapse together. The discussion on child protective services and the other one on the child protective services mesh together. If you take a look at the several topics that are related to criminal justice reform, kind of collapse all those together. Now, some of that makes for a really broad subject matter, but I'm confident that the staff can sift that out and create a structure where we can, although we have 5 items, the fact of the matter is from your background paper, we probably encompassed, 10 items or something. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would echo Delegate Plum's point. I think this is wonderful to get this kind of direction. This is very helpful. I think the reality is that CJR study is probably really equivalent to more than 1 study there. So we do need to think about that in terms of capacity and priority, because doing these 5 really might not be doable in a year if you think about how broad that particular category of study would be.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could also say too, Hal, as you know, this is a hot topic. And what we need to have in the legislative halls is really some background evidence-based material to work with.
Sure.
And so even if it evolves into a 2-year study because of the range of it, I think we need to be able to say to our legislative colleagues that, yeah, we're getting into this. I mean, we are taking a look at this. We're getting good information, and that gives us a basis on which then to proceed forward.
Sure. Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Austin.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I support all 5 of these proposals that we put forward. I do think our priorities are correct, and the VEC study is so important. I've been contacted by many of my constituents who had issues associated with receiving their compensation. The only thing I would add is possibly on number 3, the virtual learning, to look at our abilities to implement broadband in rural areas. We've had major problems implementing our virtual learning as a result of the pandemic in our rural areas. So if we could touch on how we propose to implement virtual learning in rural areas, that would be great. The governor, I know, is proposing in his 4th year expanding broadband in rural areas, which is so important. But I'm going to have to jump off, Mr. Chairman, as I explained to you yesterday, here shortly to take another call. But I fully endorse and support the 5 proposals we put forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about just access, not only what they're learning and how they're learning, but just having access to be able to do that in the first place is really important. Our budget, I think the House and Senate budget that's going to be one of the highlights I'm predicting when we come out with a budget between the 2 bodies, but we need to get that right.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Howe.
Thank you. I agree with all of these. I am particularly think we must do the Virginia Employment Commission. That's being held together with duct tape. And we've known that for years, even before the pandemic. So we're going to have to do a major effort to buck them up and look into the future for what would be best for how they should be supplied with what they need. I also appreciate the addition of the virtual learning. That's increasingly important. And I think it's more than just access. I think it's also should look into teaching techniques that work that way.
Yep, that is our intention. That's actually
Okay.
very, very good.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator
Locke.
Senator Locke. Okay, thank you, Senator Locke. Yes.
Could you repeat what you said about juvenile justice?
Yeah, it was kind of a list of things, Senator, that were parts of study ideas that people gave in, but in the whole group of things, evidence-based policies implemented in other states to reduce crime, improve human outcomes, and potentially save taxpayer dollars. Subjects to review include, and I won't say parole, I'll just say sentencing or maybe release-related issues, which are important, gun violence in communities, prison and jail improvement opportunities. So we had people that thought we need to make sure that while you're incarcerated, you have opportunities to improve yourself so you can, when you come out, that you will be able to perform positively in society. And I know the DOC currently is very proud of what they're doing, but as you know, in the local jails, the recidivism rate is not low like it is in the DOC. So that's just a personal comment. I mean, that's partly because there's not enough time in the regional and local jails, and also because they don't have the resources that the state DOC has. Both those things. I said gun violence, juvenile justice matters, and policing practices. Those were the list of things that could fall under that category. And I think, JLARC, Senator JLARC has more resources and more capacity than any other part of our legislative body. And so we really need to, in my view, give them the hardest things to do, help us with the hardest things. And because they do have the I hate to use this word again, but bandwidth to tackle some of these most complicated subjects. I know we've been working on these things off and on over the years with some success and maybe not some success in other areas, but it's our view that a focused study that we can all agree on would be very helpful.
Could that also include community-based location for juveniles, that if they are located closer to home, that may very well help with rehabilitation? Janet's laughing because I did a bill on this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this has been a debate here for a few years now. What you're saying, and also, do we have one facility or facilities at a low census right now, the Juvenile Justice Department? And I know best practices to do what you said. It's just a resource matter. And I think our good friend Dave Marsden, who worked in this area, believes what you just said would be ideal or better. But yeah, studying that, different state approaches to that issue, knowing what other states are doing in juvenile justice locally would be great.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jeremy McPike.
Yep. Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that the top priority with VEC is extraordinarily important. I think others have focused on that, and I completely agree. Agree with a lot of the elements of the criminal justice reform. There are many different topics to explore there. For the online and K-12, I agree with Delegate Austin on the broadband. I would suggest to the group that perhaps a slightly wider pandemic impact may be appropriate, because this is one aspect, but I'm also concerned about impacts to transportation funding and the shift in, frankly, commuting patterns. And I think that we're going to persist for quite some time. I think there are probably a few other elements within that, but it would suggest potentially a slightly wider viewpoint of pandemic impacts, with certainly the online education being extraordinarily important. But I think there are some larger budget impacts that may be informative as to how we need to address those with less road miles, less gas tax, and the rest of it over the long term. And I think, certainly broadband feeds right into both of those, whether it be workforce issues or education issues, and how we start to anticipate what the long-term impacts to Virginia might be. I think we've touched pretty well on the guardianship, and then housing, I think, is fine as well for long-term, but would certainly suggest, potentially a little bit wider on the pandemic impacts.
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Speaker.
following up with what the senator said, yeah, and I wonder if that, I hear you with regard to the wider impacts of the pandemic, and I wonder if that should be separate and aside from the online education. Just thinking that, what we were thinking more on the online is, how can we become a leader? What can we do to make Virginia a leader in this area? And what's involved, what does that entail? Certainly broadband, that makes sense too. So I wonder, and you all tell me, you're the experts, Helen, whether that would be two separate studies then, or I don't know how combining that would mesh, but you would all know better than I would.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it really, we could do a broader study and just staff it with more people, or we could break it into two studies. And I'm not sure in the end, it matters that much, but I think we need to think about the work involved. Obviously, a broader study will require more staff and more capacity. So we'll just have to think about it more in terms of the actual number of analysts we have to put on it, whether it's one study or two. We can certainly take on all those issues if that becomes a priority, to look at the broader pandemic issues, but certainly have a major focus be on the educational piece of that, or we could separate the education out into a separate study.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, is that you finished? You
Yes.
done? Okay. I was going to address the transportation issue that Senator McPike brought up. Obviously, long term, it looks bleak for our current sources of raising transportation money. And the bill that we just passed 4 or 5 months ago was aimed at temporarily holding us over for a while under the current system. And that was our thinking, that maybe we should, it is a big priority, but maybe not the top 5 right now because we just acted in this area. But definitely, I mean, it's up to everybody. If we want to delve into transportation for long-term solutions, that would be something that's maybe worth doing. We know what everyone talks about, what Oregon has done and some other states with regard to going away from gas tax. And someday we're probably going to have to do that. We just thought the timing right now might not be the best for it. And we have a few years with this new bill we just passed to before we get into it more deeply. But, these things are everybody.
Mr. Chairman.
Obviously. Yeah, so Chairman Howe.
Thank you. It seems to me that this is something we have to address, and we need to do it pretty quickly, because things are going to deteriorate all across the state if we don't. But it seems to me that this is something that should be a 2-year study, or if it's a 1-year study, be done the second year, because I think the other ones are more urgent. But I suspect that they could put together for us all sorts of good options and what other states are doing 2 years out.
Okay, great. Good comment. Yep. Anybody else? Ms. Greer, do you want to respond to that? Senator Howe's suggestion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a transportation study would be a good study, and we could really add some value to your policy considerations. So we could certainly put that, in the pipeline and maybe have the commission go on and approve it, but maybe have with the understanding this would not be in sequence. We would not do that first. That would be as we get time, or certainly in the second year, we'd have capacity to do it, not this coming year, but the following year, to Senator Howell's point.
Okay. Mr. Chairman of the full commission, do you have anything to say at this point? I mean, Delegate Plum?
Well, there's so many chairs here, I get mixed up. So you were talking to me.
Yes, sir.
There's so much to look at because the times are so critical. I think that first 5 that we put on the list really speaks to currently where we are and what our crises are, and where we need some more evidence-based information on which to act. So it would be my hope that the subcommittee would look favorably upon the 5 and then add the 6, as Senator Howell says, as a second year in the sequence of things that we would get to, because certainly we're not saying don't do transportation. We're saying let's do the critical stuff first, and then we'll get to transportation, where we'll have a year under our belt under the new funding arrangement. So I would hope that we would agree upon this list of topics.
Okay, Senator Locke, do you have anything to add at this point?
I mean, I agree with the ones that we've outlined, with the understanding that we're going to take a deeper dive on juvenile justice issues.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just interject, I think this is a terrific list of priorities. I do think if we're going to start to take deeper dives on some of these things within the CGR area, and if we broaden beyond schools to look at broader pandemic impacts, I think probably the reality is we will not be able to complete all that work by the end of 21. Some of that will probably have to carry over into the next year. But from our standpoint, that's fine as long as y'all understand that. And we can talk to you about priorities and things that you really would like to complete in 21 versus things that could carry over to the next year. That might be the next decision point, and maybe we don't have to decide that today, but I think somebody will need to decide which things to sequence so that we get things delivered by 21 that you'd really like, and then recognize that some will carry over to the next year.
Okay. Could you give us a criminal justice reform proposal after talking to the Crime Commission staff? Just come up with, refine what we have here, taking into account Senator Locke's proposal or interest, and that would be great. That would
Absolutely.
be great.
Happy to do that.
Okay. Senator Howe? Oh, Madam Speaker?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on that, and I know, Mr. Greer, you've had conversations with the chair of the Crime Commission, Leader Herring. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Chairman Sickles, just in consultation with having conversations with the Crime Commission staff and with Leader Herring. So I know she's communicated with you, and obviously there's limited bandwidth. So we just need to figure out who's doing what and how they can mesh together. But there's plenty there, as you said, and definitely a priority for all of us. So thanks for your efforts.
Ms. Greer, do you have anything else to say, or any summary remarks or anybody else on the subcommittee?
Go ahead. This has been very helpful. I think we can take your input today, and we'll try to come up with some written product that outlines maybe a plan and decide how best to bring that back to the subcommittee and then ultimately the full commission from here. But this to me is a very helpful start to get us moving in the right direction of what we need to be focused on going forward. So thank you for everybody's input today. It's been very helpful.
Sure. So is everybody okay with me reporting out on Monday morning when we have our full commission meeting, what we discussed today? Does anybody else want to do that? Otherwise, I'll do it if no one else volunteers. Okay, there's something else to be said. It's 10:42. We can adjourn or we could keep going. I'm flexible. Anything else? Okay. Then maybe we would accept a motion to adjourn. So I say I heard a so moved reading lips. Okay.
So moved. Second.
All right. We all in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are
Aye.
adjourned. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Your
you, everybody.
shortest Zoom call of the month. Shortest Zoom call of the month.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
See you Monday.
Bye.
Bye.